Hi everyone, it's Chris. I have a fun card to share with you today. This is a card made with Visible Image stamps. Visible Image is a company from the UK and they make beautiful clear stamps. I'm going to be using the butterfly from this one, the door frame from that one, and a couple other sets here that I will show you in just a moment. I'm going to get started here. I'm using a piece of watercolor paper. This is Artistico hot press paper. It's a smooth textured watercolor paper, and I like this for doing some inking with my Distress Oxide inks. So I am using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I am stamping this door frame. This door is from the set Ahead of Our Time by Visible Image, and I'm also going to be creating a mask. So I just put a piece of 2-inch Post-it tape down over my first stamped image, and then without re-inking, I inked up that tape. I got a very faint outline and I cut out that mask with my scissors. And now I've placed the mask on my original panel here, and I'm going to do some inking with Distress Oxides. I am starting with black soot at the bottom of my image. I'm using my mouse pad from my Memory MISTI here. I have found that these mouse pads and the coated texture of the back of these is fantastic as a craft mat. It stays put on my table and I can easily clean this up when I'm done. So I am using this to ink my background. Now I started with black soot and then I went to forest moss, and as I was working on this I realized that I wished I had cut out that center of that door frame. So I decided to do that. I removed the mask, and using a metal ruler and my pen blade, I just sliced out that center, that rectangle of that door frame. I had to give it a little extra trim there, and now I'm going to carefully pick this up and put it back onto my panel. Now I need to ink up the interior of that door, and I'm kind of holding it here because it is so thin, it's a little not sticking as well as I'd hoped. But I am going to work that forest moss ink and that black soot in and kind of match that up with my background. And then I'm going to move on. I'm going to make this kind of graduated color background here. I want a kind of a fantasy, just a very, very loose background here. I want the colors to be changing from the black up to this bright, brilliant sky. So I have been working with black soot, forest moss, frayed burlap, and then I worked in some faded jeans color, and that is, I kind of blended that deep into that frayed burlap, kind of a foggy transitional color. And now I'm working on the upper sky, which is kind of the bright blue. I'm using Broken China. And I'm really working these colors together. I love these oxides because they blend so well. Now I've decided to add some clouds to the sky. So there is some amazing little cloud stamps. These are from the set Believe in Unicorns by Visible Image. And I am going to stamp both of these cloud images kind of randomly across the top. I don't want them to be very stark or really crisp in stamping. I am using Gina K white pigment ink, but I am kind of using that generational stamping just so I get kind of one that's a little bit more brilliant, and then I'll stamp it like 2 more times just to get that ink off, and so I have this kind of buildup of color here. They're going to be quite faint because the pigment it's going on to still damp inked background. I did not let it dry. Had I done that, it would have been a little more vibrant, but I didn't want it vibrant. I want a really faint background of clouds here in my sky. They are not my focus of my card anyway. So now, while I'm going to let this dry a little bit, I'm going to use my Copic markers. And if you've ever tried Copic markers on watercolor paper, it is pretty tricky because watercolor paper is very absorbent. You have to be very, very careful. I'm coloring very lightly, and I'm staying away from the lines because the Copic ink, it bleeds into this paper and it will spread. So if you do use some Copics on your watercolor paper, you have to be sure that you leave some room for that ink to spread. So I am quickly putting down some color. I started with E43, and then I'm adding some shading with E44 and then E49. And then I'm going to go back and kind of work those colors together a little bit more. That edge of that open door, I'm using the E49 and just a little bit in the corner for a little bit of extra shadowing and shading there. I want it to look a little bit 3D, that door is opening, but yet there is quite the unknown here. Now, I waited about a half an hour for everything to dry before I started with my embossing. So now I'm going back to my original MISTI, and I'm going to be using the butterfly from a set called Live Life Now. It's such a really fun, large butterfly. And then I'm using the sentiment from Creativity. And because I'm using my MISTI and I'm embossing all three of these at the same time, I can pick them all up and I can stamp them all at the same time with my MISTI. I'm using Wow embossing ink. This is a really sticky, slow drying ink, and I just recently got it a couple weeks ago and I really like it. So I'm going to use that today. I'm just kind of gently pressing just to make sure that I get a nice image here. Usually you only have to stamp this once with this embossing ink. And then I'm going right to my Gina K Gold embossing powder and covering my image. I did use my anti-static tool first just to make sure that this powder doesn't stick to any places that I didn't want. And by giving it that probably half hour of drying time from that Distress Oxide ink and my pigment ink, that really helped too, because my paper was really good and dry too. Now, once my embossing was done, my card is pretty much done. So I did trim my panel to make sure that it would fit within a 5x7 craft card base. And all I'm going to do is adhere my inked and embossed panel to my card base. And my card for today is finished. Thanks for watching, everyone.